Welcome back to Benny's Custom Works, proudly supported by Valvoline and Sparesbox. Don't forget Benny 5 on checkout. This week we are re-lifting the Pajero Mini. Some of you will remember from earlier episodes, this thing used to be jacked up sky high, relatively obviously for a K four-wheel drive. I actually worked out one day having it on the hoist that the CVs were binding at full droop, which is no good. Obviously it's going to damage CVs and all sorts of stuff, especially if you're out on the trails. So I took the lift kit out because it was actually a spacer style lift kit. It wasn't a longer strut or anything like that. So long story short, the lift kit was gone. I put it back to stock height. As a byproduct of doing that, I believe the lift kit was actually a different height left to right in the front. And as a result of that, the car then became drooped on the driver's side. So it was 20 mil lower on this side than factory. Rather than mucking around trying to buy secondhand springs and play around with it, I've just gone and bought some 30 mil up lifted springs. I saw some from Japan, ordered them last week. They've just turned up now. Literally today they turned up. We weren't even planning to shoot this today, but being that they've arrived nice and early, we're gonna hook in today. So we've also got a few other parts. We've got some new rubber bushes for the strut tops in the front and also the top retaining plate as well. I wanna do this thing properly. Like there's no point sort of doing it half a job and then having to pull it apart later. So yeah, having all these original parts, surprisingly, tons of stuff still available for this thing, considering it was built in 1995 or something. Yeah, there's been heaps of parts. Obviously the time belt kit, which you guys have already now seen, that's recently gone in as well. All genuine Mitsubishi stuff. All the strut top parts that I've bought are all genuine Mitsubishi as well. Obviously the springs are aftermarket. However, yeah, there's a surprising amount of genuine parts still available for it. So I'm gonna throw this thing in the air. We'll do the rears first because they're easier and I hate dealing with spring compressors. So hopefully by halfway through this episode, I'll have worked up the courage to try and cut my fingers off with a spring compressor. So we'll start with the back because there should be less compressor-y finger chopping. Now, I thought it was worth mentioning whenever you're working on a vehicle, especially a light one like a K car or a K truck or a K4 drive like this one, if you're using a screw jack or a twisty stand on a hoist, be very mindful to make sure that you're not actually lifting the car off of the hoist. I was just using the screw jack to actually lift the diff back into position to compress the springs. And because the car's quite light, I actually started to lift the car off of the hoist pad, so that's the reason why we had it on the ground, putting the rear shock bolts back in. Obviously, when you're pulling the springs out in the rear of this, you need to disconnect the shocks, and then that lets the diff droop. So yeah, just basically the reinstall of that is to put on the ground and compress the springs. Obviously, if you're doing this at home, probably don't have access to a hoist, but if you are using a hoist, obviously keep this in mind because I have seen cars actually get pushed off of hoists or moved around on hoists with these before. So yeah, definitely worth keeping in mind because this definitely has the power to push a car off a hoist. Safety second, kids. Don't do that. I already knew how much tension was in those struts because I have already had them apart. There's not a lot of preload in them. However, when you're normally pulling struts apart, I highly recommend to use some spring compressors just to hold those the factory springs in a semi-compressed state. Then once you remove the nut and the top, you can back the compressors off like usual. Well, it's another episode in the bag. We've spent another day fixing some suspension problems that this thing had. Pretty obvious that that old lift kit wasn't really safe and shouldn't really have been in the car. So originally we had about a 70mm lift in the suspension setup. Then we went back to the stock stuff, obviously back to square one. And then now we're about 30mm up. So I don't think it's going to hinder the thing at all. And now I've actually got a bit of articulation and the CVs don't bind at full droop. So yeah, pretty happy with all of that. And hopefully we'll be hitting some trails sooner or later. So stay tuned for that. Thanks for watching, guys. We'll see you next time.